Have you ever fought for a place you already earned, only to be told you didn't belong? Imagine boarding a flight with your ticket in hand, your seat paid in full, your future ahead of you, only to watch someone else claim it, simply because they believed you weren't worthy. That was the moment for Amara Jenkins, a 12-year-old black billionaire and tech prodigy. In seconds, a simple seat dispute spiraled into a storm of prejudice, corporate conspiracy, and choices that could define her life's path. What would you do if your dignity was questioned in front of strangers? Would you stay silent to avoid conflict, or would you stand tall and risk everything to prove the truth? This is not just Amara's story. It's a mirror, because maybe you, too, have felt overlooked. Maybe you've been told you weren't enough, and maybe, just maybe, you've wondered what it would look like to refuse to move. Stay with us as we step into a story that begins with a stolen seat and ends with a lesson about justice, courage, and hope. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the journey. The morning light at JFK International Airport was sharp and cold, cutting through the high-glass windows of Terminal 4. Travelers shuffled with their coffee cups, dragging roller bags, each caught between the fatigue of early hours and the anticipations of departure. In that ordinary crowd walked a girl who, to the world, was anything but ordinary. Amara Jenkins was 12. Small shoulders, long braids neatly tied back, a quiet grace that made her look even younger than her age. But behind her soft face and curious eyes lived a mind already reshaping industries. Dreamscape AI, the company she had founded barely 2 years ago, had grown from a bedroom project into one of the fastest rising names in artificial intelligence. Investors had called her a prodigy. Journalists had called her a miracle. She preferred to be called a girl who still liked sketching in notebooks and sneaking candy into her backpack. Beside her walked Marcus Jenkins, her father, tall, calm, every step measured. Marcus had built an empire in finance, but he carried himself with a humility that made strangers often mistake him for just another businessman. He could have announced who they were. He could have called ahead to have the airline roll out the carpet. But Marcus believed in teaching his daughter resilience, the kind that comes not from protection, but from weathering storms. They reached the gate, handed their boarding passes, and walked into the narrow jet bridge. The air smelled faintly metallic, laced with jet fuel and recirculated air. Amara clutched her ticket, Seat 2A, first class. She had smiled when she first saw the assignment. Window seat, perfect for watching clouds. Inside the cabin, the space gleamed, wide seats wrapped in leather, overhead bins glinting with brushed steel. Flight attendants greeted passengers with practiced smiles. Amara stepped carefully down the aisle until her eyes landed on row 2. Her smile faltered. The seat was occupied. A man white, mid-50s, polished navy suit, wrist heavy with a gold watch, lounged in 2A as though it belonged to him. His bag was tucked overhead. His jacket hung neatly on the hook. He scrolled on his phone without a hint of doubt that he belonged there. Amara froze, her ticket still in her hand. She looked at the number again, 2A, then at the placard above the row, 2A. No mistake. She swallowed and spoke softly, her voice polite but clear. "Excuse me, sir. That's my seat." The man finally looked up. His eyes flicked from her face to the ticket in her hand, then back to her small frame. A smirk curled on his lips. "Sweetheart," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "First class isn't for kids. You must be confused. Go find your parents." Amara's chest tightened. She held out the boarding pass, steady despite the sting in her throat. This is my seat. 2A. The man chuckled, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Come on now. They let children wander in here by mistake all the time. You probably belong in economy. Go on, run along before we take off. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, pretending not to notice. Others glanced between the girl and the man, waiting to see what would happen. Marcus stepped closer, his hand gently resting on Amara's shoulder. His voice was calm, almost too calm. Sir, the boarding pass is correct. This is her seat. The man's eyes narrowed. And who are you supposed to be? Her father, Marcus said simply. The man leaned back, spreading himself wider into the seat. Then teach your daughter some manners. First class isn't a playground. For a long second, the only sound was the steady hum of boarding. The overhead bins slammed shut one by one. The flight attendants moved briskly, yet none of them intervened. Amara felt heat rising in her chest. She wanted to cry, to disappear, but she remembered her father's words, said countless times at the dinner table, in car rides, in quiet moments before sleep. Dignity is not what people give you. It's what you refuse to let them take. So she straightened her back. My ticket says 2A, she repeated. Her voice no longer trembled. I'm not moving. Passengers turned. A murmur rippled through the cabin. The man in 2A's smile faltered, just a shade, as though he hadn't expected resistance. At that moment, a flight attendant Sandra badge pinned neatly to her uniform approached. She looked from Amara to the man, then to Marcus. Her smile was tight, her tone clipped. Is there a problem here? This little girl is sitting in the wrong section, the man said smoothly, as if the matter were settled. She doesn't belong here. Sandra hesitated, eyes flicking to the boarding pass in Amara's hand. She saw it clearly. Seat 2A. But instead of addressing the man, she turned to the girl. Miss, maybe you can take another seat just for now while we sort this out. It'll make things easier for everyone. The words cut sharper than any shout. Amara's jaw tightened. Her father's hand pressed lightly on her shoulder, not guiding her away, but grounding her. Marcus did not speak. He wanted to see if his daughter would stand. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. From across the aisle, an older woman adjusted her glasses. Her voice carried the calm firmness of someone who had lived long enough not to fear speaking up. I saw her boarding pass when we lined up. It says 2A. That gentleman should move. The man in 2A turned, bristling. Stay out of this. But the woman didn't flinch. She looked straight at Sandra, the flight attendant. You know the truth. Don't ask the child to move. Amara's heart beat hard against her ribs. For the first time since boarding, she felt a sliver of relief. Someone believed her. Someone cared enough to say it aloud. The hum of the engines deepened as the crew prepared for takeoff. Yet the plane felt as though it had frozen mid-air. Every eye in the cabin was now on row 2, on the small black girl standing her ground against a man who had stolen her seat. And somewhere deep inside her, Amara felt something shift. She wasn't just defending a chair, she was defending her right to belong. Amara lowered herself slowly into the edge of another seat nearby, not because she had surrendered, but because she wanted a moment to breathe. Her heart still hammered from the confrontation. She could feel the weight of eyes pressing against her, strangers staring as if they were watching a play unfold, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some simply entertained by the drama. She pulled her small backpack into her lap and unzipped it. Inside were ordinary things for a girl her age. a notebook with doodles in the margins, a half-eaten pack of gum, a tangle of earphones, and a book she had been reading about constellations. Ordinary things, but her life was anything but ordinary. 2 years ago, she had written the first lines of code that would become Dreamscape AI. At the time, it was just an experiment, something to help her analyze the stories she loved reading. She wanted to see patterns in characters, predict how narratives might unfold. From there, it had grown into a tool far more powerful than she had imagined, one that caught the eye of investors who saw promise, then of industries who saw profit. By the time she turned 12, Dreamscape was valued at hundreds of millions. She looked at her reflection in the polished surface of the seatback screen. All she saw was a thin black girl with round cheeks and nervous eyes. To the world, she was the billionaire girl. To herself, she was still a child trying to understand why adults dismissed her so easily. Her father sat quietly beside her, his long frame relaxed, hands folded loosely. To anyone watching, he seemed calm, maybe even indifferent, but Amara knew better. His silence was deliberate, a test. Marcus had always believed in letting her stand in her own strength. He had told her once, when she had complained about classmates who teased her for being the kid genius, that storms don't stop for children. You learn to stand in them, or you get swept away. She turned toward him now, her eyes searching his face for guidance. "Dad," she whispered, "should I have pushed harder?" His eyes softened. "You did what was right. You held your ground, without raising your voice. That matters more than shouting." "But he still has my seat," she said, the frustration spilling through. "And she—" Amara nodded toward Sandra. "The flight attendant acted like I was the problem." Marcus inhaled slowly, then exhaled, his gaze drifting across the cabin. "This world will test you 1,000 times like that. Some tests you win quickly, others take longer. The question isn't whether they move you from your seat. The question is whether they move you from yourself." Amara sat back, chewing on his words. She wanted to be strong, but she also wanted to cry, because it was exhausting always being the one who had to prove she belonged. Across the aisle, Elizabeth Grant caught her eye. The older woman offered a small nod, almost like a signal, "I see you. You're not alone." That simple gesture sent a warmth through Amara's chest. The plane continued to fill. The shuffle of boarding slowed. Overhead bins closed with dull thumps. Engines outside whined to life. Yet the tension in row 2 still lingered, like static in the air. Richard Coleman leaned back in 2A as though nothing had happened, tapping away on his phone, perfectly comfortable in stolen comfort. Amara opened her notebook and scribbled. The lines didn't form words at first, just restless shapes. But soon she found herself writing a sentence over and over. "I belong here. I belong here." She could hear her own voice in those words, steady, refusing to be erased. Her mind drifted back to nights at home in Harlem, coding until her eyes ached. Marcus checking in with warm cups of tea. She thought about the investors' faces when she pitched Dreamscape at only 10 years old, their polite disbelief melting into stunned silence as her demo unfolded. She thought about how proud she had felt when the first contract was signed, when the first real paycheck landed. She had built something no one could dismiss. And yet, in this cabin, one man's arrogance and one attendant's bias had the power to make her feel small again. Marcus watched her quietly. He remembered his own past too clearly, the restaurants that refused him service when he was younger, the meetings where his ideas were stolen by men with lighter skin, The bank managers who once doubted his creditworthiness even as his accounts overflowed. He had built his empire not just with numbers, but with scars. And now he watched his daughter carry scars of her own, earlier than he ever wanted. He closed his eyes briefly, struggling with the father's dilemma: should he shield her, or let her fight? He wanted to stand, to demand the man leave two-way, to call in favors that could have ended the dispute instantly. But then what would Amara learn? That dignity only came when someone powerful defended you, or that she had her own voice strong enough to be heard. He chose silence, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much about the lessons she carried forward. A chime sounded overhead, the captain's voice spilling through the speakers with routine announcements. Yet to Amara, every word blurred, because her thoughts were louder. She imagined herself standing again, confronting Coleman in front of everyone. She pictured him sneering, refusing to move, and she pictured herself refusing to back down, no matter what. The idea both scared her and filled her with a strange fire. "Dad," she said softly, "why do they hate it so much? Why do they hate that I'm here?" Marcus opened his eyes, meeting hers. "They don't hate you," he said gently. "They hate what you represent. That someone who looks like you, someone so young, someone they never expected, could already have power. It unsettles them. But remember, their fear is not your burden." Amara nodded, though her chest still ached. She pressed her pencil harder into the page, underlining the words, "I belong here." Around them, passengers buckled seatbelts, attendants checked latches. Sandra passed again, her smile still polite, but her eyes avoiding Amara's. It was easier for her to pretend neutrality than to acknowledge the quiet injustice. Elizabeth Grant leaned slightly forward in her seat. "Don't let them shrink you, child," she said in a low, firm voice. "I've seen men like him all my life. They take until someone tells them no." Amara looked at her, gratitude pooling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The older woman smiled faintly. "You won't always get thanks for standing tall, but you'll never regret it." The engines roared louder now, the plane trembling with readiness. The cabin lights dimmed, seatbelt signs glowed. Yet inside Amara, another storm was building, one not from turbines or weather, but from the clash between fear and resolve. She closed her notebook and placed it carefully back into her backpack. Her hand steadied. She leaned back, fastening her seatbelt, and for the first time since stepping onto the plane, she felt a calm settle in her. The man in 2A might have stolen a seat, but he had not stolen her voice. And deep down, Amara knew this was only the beginning of something larger, though she couldn't yet see how wide the storm would grow. The cabin hummed with the layered sounds of preparation, overhead bins latching, passengers settling, the muffled voices of crew speaking into handheld radios. Yet the stillness around row 2 felt like a storm's eye, deceptively calm but heavy with expectation. Amara sat upright, her boarding pass folded neatly in her lap. She could feel the paper's edges pressing against her palm, grounding her like an anchor. Every few seconds her gaze flicked toward the seat that was rightfully hers, now still occupied by Richard Coleman. He seemed to enjoy the spectacle, shifting casually, stretching his legs, making his possession of the seat look permanent. Sandra, the flight attendant, reappeared. Her face carried that polished smile attendants learn in training, but her eyes betrayed tension. She crouched slightly, voice pitched low as if addressing a child in school. "Miss, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. We can get you a comfortable seat nearby. The flight is full, but I'll see what I can do." "Okay." Amara met her gaze. "No. My ticket says 2A. That's my seat?" Sandra's smile flickered, then stiffened. She turned to Marcus, as though the father might be more reasonable. "Sir, maybe you can encourage her. It would really help us keep things moving smoothly." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. His voice was calm, even. "My daughter has already spoken for herself. The boarding pass is clear." A flush rose on Sandra's cheeks. She straightened, adjusting her blazer, and glanced at Coleman. He offered her a thin smile, the kind that silently demanded allegiance. Sandra exhaled. "Sir," she said to Coleman, "do you happen to have your boarding pass handy?" Coleman's eyes narrowed. For a moment he didn't move, as though insulted by the request. Then, with exaggerated reluctance, he pulled a folded slip of paper from his breast pocket and handed it over. Sandra studied it. Row 4C, not 2A. Her lips pressed into a line. She handed it back quickly, too quickly, as though she didn't want to linger on the truth. "Thank you." She turned back to Amara. "We'll sort this out after takeoff. For now, please just remain seated where you are." The dismissal was gentle in tone, but sharp in meaning. Amara's breath caught. She could hear her father's words echoing in her memory. "Dignity is what you refuse to let them take." Her chest tightened, but she said nothing. Elizabeth Grant's voice broke the silence. The older woman leaned forward again, her eyes fixed on Sandra. "You saw the ticket. You saw his. The child is in the right. Why delay the truth?" Several passengers nearby shifted, restless. A young man across the aisle lifted his phone slightly, the small lens glinting. Others whispered, the low hum of opinion threading through the cabin. Coleman waved a dismissive hand. "This is ridiculous. Are we going to delay a flight because a child can't accept a mistake?" Amara's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream that it wasn't a mistake, that she had paid the same as anyone else, that she belonged here. Instead, she held still, her hands gripping the edges of her notebook. Sandra offered another brittle smile. "Everyone just relax. We'll resolve this soon." But the way she said it, the careful neutrality, the practiced calm carried the same weight as judgment. It was easier for her to ask the young black girl to wait than to confront the older white man in the wrong. Marcus watched silently, though his eyes burned. He remembered too many moments in boardrooms when colleagues had sidestepped truth to preserve comfort. He recognized the same cowardice in Sandra's evasions. The engines outside roared to life, a tremor running through the floor. Overhead lights dimmed to a softer glow. Amara glanced at her father. He gave her the slightest nod, not a command, not even reassurance, just acknowledgement. "You are seen." She turned back to Sandra. "How long will it take to fix this?" she asked, her voice even. Sandra blinked, caught off guard by the composure. After we're in the air, we'll see what can be done." Amara shook her head. "No. My ticket says 2A. Why should I wait?" A murmur of agreement spread among a few passengers. Someone whispered, "She's right." Coleman huffed, adjusting his watch. "This is absurd. Let's just go. Move the kid." Elizabeth's voice cut through again, stronger this time. "No, she doesn't move. He does." The force of her words seemed to ripple outward. The young man with the phone began recording openly now. Another passenger, a middle-aged woman, crossed her arms and nodded. The tide of perception in the cabin was shifting, if only slightly. Sandra straightened, discomfort radiating from her posture. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, she looked as though she might finally insist Coleman give up the seat. But then, with a glance toward him and a steady glare, she faltered. "Let's just get in the air," she murmured. "We'll revisit this." Amara sat back slowly, but inside her chest the storm grew louder. She felt both invisible and too visible at once. It wasn't just a seat anymore. It was every dismissal, every assumption, every door that had been closed in her father's generation and now again in hers. She pulled her notebook out once more. This time, instead of writing words, she sketched the outline of a plane, a small figure in a window seat, a caption underneath one day, "They will see me." The engines surged louder, pressing bodies into seats. The cabin lights flickered. A tremor rattled the overhead bins. A few gasps sounded as turbulence hit even before takeoff. Hamar tightened her grip on the notebook. Somewhere deep inside, she sensed this was only the beginning. The storm outside mirrored the storm within, and both were far from over. The plane taxied toward the runway, its wheels rumbling over the concrete. Outside the oval windows, dusk had begun to drape the sky in deepening shades of amber and gray. Inside, however, the tension in row 2 seemed brighter than ever, as if the very air vibrated with conflict. Amara sat with her seatbelt snug, her hands gripping the strap across her chest. She told herself to breathe in steady rhythms, to calm the storm building inside. Marcus watched her closely, his eyes calm but alert. He knew his daughter's heart knew that what seemed like silence on the outside was actually a torrent of thoughts and questions swirling inside her. Richard Coleman leaned back in the leather seat of 2A as though he had won some invisible war. He tapped at his phone, thumbs moving quickly, a faint smirk curling at his lips. To him, this was more than a seat. It was a statement people like him could bend the rules, and people like Amar were expected to yield. What he didn't realize was that eyes around the cabin had begun to sharpen. Elizabeth Grant's phone now sat in her lap, camera discreetly tilted toward him. The young man across the aisle recorded without shame. Even those who stayed silent leaned forward ever so slightly, as though witnessing something they knew mattered more than the flight schedule. The plane jolted as turbulence rolled across it. Though they hadn't even lifted off yet, crosswinds shook the fuselage, causing overhead bins to rattle and passengers to clutch their armrests. A collective gasp rose, then subsided into nervous laughter. Sandra's voice carried from the aisle. "Everything's fine, folks. Just a little bump from the weather." Her tone was steady, but her eyes flicked again toward row 2, betraying her unease. Amara felt the vibration through her bones. The rattling wasn't just mechanical. It felt like a mirror of her own fight to stay steady. She thought of her notebook, tucked under her thigh. The words she had written earlier, "I belong here." The turbulence made the words feel alive, pulsing through her veins. Then she noticed Coleman's movements. He angled his phone closer to his chest, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I'm on the plane," he murmured. "Yeah, already handled. She's not in the seat anymore." A pause. "Don't worry. I'll make sure it sticks. You know I've got backing." Amara's ears pricked. She wasn't meant to hear him, but her seat was close enough, and his arrogance careless enough, that his words drifted toward her. She glanced at her father, uncertain if she should speak. Marcus's gaze was steady, but he hadn't heard. Coleman chuckled softly into the phone. "Relax. They're not going to risk upsetting a long-time platinum customer. I'll have the whole thing smoothed out by the time we land." Another pause, then a sly grin. She won't be a problem again. Amara's stomach twisted. The casual cruelty in his voice, the certainty that he could erase her claim with a single call, it dug deep. She looked toward Elizabeth, who raised her brows as if to say, I heard too. The plane lurched again, harder this time. Cups rattled, someone yelped, and a baby began to cry. Sandra hurried down the aisle, bracing herself on the seats. She leaned toward Coleman, her words low. Sir, I need you to finish that call. We're about to take off. Coleman gave her a look that suggested obedience was optional, then muttered into the phone, I'll call you back, before sliding it into his pocket. Amara's chest tightened. She couldn't shake the echo of his words. She won't be a problem again. Her father leaned closer, his voice a whisper. You all right? She nodded, though her throat burned. He called someone, said I wouldn't be a problem again. Marcus's eyes narrowed. His jaw clenched for the first time that evening, the calm surface cracking just enough to reveal steel beneath. Elizabeth leaned over from her row, her voice steady but low. He thinks this seat is his birthright. He's wrong. But don't let him scare you, child. You've already rattled him. The engines roared louder as the plane prepared to lift. The cabin lights dimmed further, casting shadows across faces tense with anticipation. Amara thought about the countless interviews where journalists had asked her how it felt to be so young, so successful. She thought about the children who had written letters to her, saying she inspired them. She thought about the weight of those words now. If she yielded here, what would that say to every child who had looked up to her? The plane surged forward, wheels thundering across the runway, bodies pressed back into seats, the force of acceleration humming in their chests. Coleman gripped the armrest of his stolen seat with a smug satisfaction, unaware that his quiet call had planted seeds of doubt in those who had overheard. Amara closed her eyes as the nose lifted. For a breathless moment, the world tilted, then steadied as the plane broke free from Earth. But inside her, something else was breaking free too, a resolve sharper than fear. The seat might be stolen, the attendant might be complicit, but she would not be silent. Not this time. At 30,000 feet, the hum of the engines filled the cabin like a steady drumbeat. Outside, clouds drifted in silver layers beneath the wings, glowing faintly under the last scraps of daylight. The plane seemed calm, but within the rows of passengers, an undercurrent of unease was quietly spreading. It began with a single vibration. The young man across the aisle, who had been recording discreetly, lifted his phone again. This time, he tapped the screen a few times, whispering under his breath. A moment later, he pressed send. Somewhere beyond the metal walls of the aircraft, the video of Amara being denied her rightful seat was already on its way into the world. Elizabeth Grant noticed the glow of his phone and asked softly, "You posted it?" He nodded. People need to see. Stuff like this happens too often. Nobody believes it until they see it. Elizabeth's eyes softened. She reached for Amara's hand, squeezing it lightly. "You hear that? Child already? Your truth is flying faster than this plane." Amara looked down at her lap, where her notebook rested again. She wanted to believe Elizabeth, but fear tugged at her. What if the video made things worse? What if the world laughed, or called her spoiled, or said she was making a fuss about nothing? The internet was merciless, she knew that much, even at her age. Still, a small flicker of hope sparked. If even one person out there saw what was happening and said, "She deserves better," maybe it would matter. Meanwhile, Richard Coleman reclined further in the stolen seat, scrolling his phone with exaggerated ease. His smirk hadn't faded, but his eyes darted now and then toward the aisle, uneasy at the whispers rising around him. He could sense the atmosphere shifting, though he pretended otherwise. Sandra, the attendant, passed by again with her tray tucked against her side. She avoided Amara's gaze, avoided Elizabeth's too. But passengers weren't blind. They saw the avoidance, and silence became its own indictment. Across the row, a middle-aged man leaned to his wife. His voice was low, but not low enough. "That girl's ticket was for 2A. "We saw it," his wife whispered back. "So why is he still sitting there? They're treating her like she doesn't matter." A young woman 2 rows behind joined in. "Because she's a kid? Because she's black? You think they'd tell a white boy with a ticket to wait?" The words traveled like sparks, row by row. Passengers absorbed them, repeated them, reshaped them into their own versions. Soon the cabin carried an almost electric buzz, a collective awareness impossible to ignore. Amara sat straighter, her small shoulders squared. For the first time that evening, she didn't feel completely alone. The murmurs around her sounded like a distant chorus, voices that echoed her father's lesson: storms don't stop for children. But maybe, just maybe, storms could be turned by enough voices refusing silence. Marcus remained calm, his expression carved from patience, yet inside, he was listening keenly. He recognized the shift. The silence that had shielded Coleman was dissolving into something else, something restless, dangerous for those who thought power alone was protection. The plane jolted suddenly, dipping before steadying again. Gas filled the cabin. Sandra hurried down the aisle, fastening a loose latch. But the turbulence only deepened the sense that something larger was shaking this flight, something that couldn't be soothed with a smile. Amara's stomach flipped with the bump. She pressed her notebook open again and began to write quickly. "They think we're quiet. They think we'll disappear. But we don't." Her pencil moved furiously, each line stronger than the last. She didn't notice Elizabeth watching, tears glinting in the older woman's eyes. A chime sounded. The captain's voice came through, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting some rough air for the next 20 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The announcement settled over the cabin, but the turbulence inside row 2 didn't need any weather to keep it alive. Coleman muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable. All this noise over one seat." He spoke loudly enough for Amara to hear, deliberately so. Amara turned her head slowly. "It's not just a seat," she said, her voice steady though her heart raced. "It's respect." The words hung in the air like a strike of lightning. Passengers glanced up, their whispers silenced for a beat. Even Sandra froze mid-step, tray still pressed to her side. Coleman scoffed, rolling his eyes, but the smirk slipped a little. For the first time, Amara had spoken not just for herself, but for everyone listening. Elizabeth's voice followed. "She's right. This isn't about comfort. It's about dignity. And if this airline can't see that, then maybe the rest of us should." The murmurs rose louder now, less fragmented, more unified. Someone said, "Exactly." Another said, "She deserves her seat." Sandra looked trapped, torn between authority and truth. Her training told her to de-escalate, to appease the louder, older passenger. But the cabin had shifted, and appeasing him no longer felt safe. Every pair of eyes seemed to demand something different from her. Amara looked down at her notebook again, her hands trembling slightly. Not with fear, but with the surge of adrenaline that comes when truth finally finds a voice. She thought of her friends back home, the ones who sometimes teased her for being too much or too ambitious. She thought of children who would see the video now climbing through the digital world. Maybe they would see themselves in her, see that even when the world tried to push you aside, you could still hold your ground, Coleman muttered again, quieter this time. His confidence wavered as he noticed the shifting glances. No longer admiration, no longer indifference. Now, judgment, and judgment, when shared by many, could feel heavier than any turbulence. Sandra inhaled sharply, as though steeling herself. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the young man across the aisle raised his phone higher. "It's already online," he said, his voice loud enough for several rows to hear. "People are watching right now." Gas rippled through the cabin. Coleman stiffened. Sandra's eyes widened. Amara's chest surged with a mix of fear and relief. The storm wasn't private anymore. Whatever happened next, the world would see. She pressed her notebook closed gently, her small hand resting on the cover as though sealing a promise. The plane continued forward, suspended in rough air and heavy silence. But inside Amara something shifted. For the first time since boarding, she felt power not in money, not in fame, but in the simple truth that once spoken aloud, injustice could no longer hide in shadows. At 35,000 feet, the cabin lights glowed a dim gold. Passengers shifted in their seats, trying to relax into the rhythm of flight. But the air felt charged. The storm outside had thinned into scattered clouds. Yet inside, a storm of another kind was gaining strength, one carried not by wind, but by words and images already racing through invisible networks. The young man across the aisle tapped frantically at his phone. Despite spotty Wi-Fi, the video had gone out, and his notifications began to ping one after another, muted but insistent. He leaned toward Amara, whispering, "It's spreading. Already hundreds of views in just minutes." Amara blinked. Her chest tightened. She imagined strangers, thousands of them watching her hold her boarding pass, hearing Sandra's dismissive tone, seeing Coleman recline in her seat. The thought was both terrifying and electrifying. Elizabeth Grant, sitting tall with quiet dignity, nodded knowingly. "Child, you may not realize it yet, but the ground shifted the moment the video left this plane." Coleman overheard. His lips tightened, the smug curve fading. He muttered, "Pathetic. Internet junk. Nobody cares about a brat throwing a fit." But his eyes betrayed unease. He knew the power of a camera in the age of viral storms. He had seen men undone in hours, reputations shredded by clips shorter than a breath. Sandra, the attendant, seemed torn in half. She walked briskly up the aisle toward the galley, her polished shoes tapping too quickly against the carpet. A fellow crew member whispered to her, glancing toward row 2. Sandra's shoulders stiffened. In row 3, whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see her ticket?" "Yes. 2A. Clear as day." "So why's he still sitting there?" "Because they don't want to challenge him." "That's why." Each whisper was fuel, each repetition making the injustice heavier. Amara could feel it now, not just her own burden, but the collective weight of strangers recognizing her struggle. Her father, Marcos, leaned back with arms folded, his face still carved from patience, but his eyes were sharper, scanning the cabin, cataloging every shift in energy. He had led boardrooms where fortunes turned on silence or speech. He knew momentum when he saw it, and he knew his daughter stood at its center. Amara opened her notebook again. She didn't doodle this time. She wrote a single sentence. "The world is watching now." She underlined it twice, the pencil etching deep grooves into the paper. The Wi-Fi buzz carried further. Phones pinged across the cabin as passengers refreshed feeds. A young woman in row 5 gasped quietly, showing her screen to her husband. "Look, it's already on Twitter. People are tagging the airline." Another voice chimed in. "It's on TikTok, too. Hashtags blowing up." Coleman shifted in his seat. He tugged at his collar, glanced toward Sandra returning from the galley, and hissed, "Do something. Shut this down before it gets out of hand." Sandra's polished smile faltered. She leaned closer, whispering, "Sir, once it's online, there's nothing I can do." Her honesty cost her. Coleman's face darkened. "Then you'd better hope your job can handle the fallout." Amara caught every word. She clenched her fists, fury rising. But Elizabeth's hand squeezed hers gently, reminding her not to let anger consume her. The plane rocked again with a patch of turbulence, trays rattling, glasses clinking. Passengers gasped, then laughed nervously. But the laughter faded quickly back into whispers about row 2. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm, yet carrying through the hum of the engines. "You know, Richard, there's something heavier than turbulence in this cabin. It's the truth, and truth has a way of breaking free, no matter how hard you press against it." Coleman scoffed, but it was thinner now, like a mask cracking. "Spare me your speeches. Nobody out there cares." Yet even as he spoke, a ringtone pierced the air, sharp, insistent. His phone lit up with a caller ID he didn't want Amara to see. He silenced it quickly, but not quickly enough. The glow reflected briefly against the window. Elizabeth's sharp eyes caught the name. She whispered to Amara, "That call wasn't just personal. He's connected to someone higher up." Amara's mind raced. She thought about Coleman's earlier words, "I'll make sure it sticks." She realized he hadn't been boasting. He had been planning. The young man with the phone leaned closer, showing her his screen. "Look," he whispered. "It's already over 10,000 views. Comments everywhere. People saying this happens too much. They're asking your name." Amara's heart pounded. She hesitated, then said softly, "Don't tell them yet. Not my name. Not yet." The young man nodded. "Understood. The video speaks for itself anyway." She leaned back, staring at the ceiling lights, breathing deeply. Part of her wanted to vanish, to be invisible again. But another part, the stronger part, wanted the world to know she wasn't invisible. Not anymore. Across the aisle, a woman pulled her phone closer to her chest and muttered to her husband, "This is going to explode by the time we land." And explode it did, though they couldn't see it from 35,000 feet. Amara's face was already on trending feeds. Her quiet refusal replayed with captions like she paid for 2A. They stole it anyway. Others added, "Respect is not negotiable." Coleman's name wasn't known yet, but his image was already circulating, the camera capturing every smug glance, every dismissive wave. He didn't know it yet, but his arrogance was becoming a symbol. Sandra tried to keep serving drinks, but her hands trembled. She could feel judgment pressing against her, not just from passengers, but from the invisible millions now watching. She knew her smile couldn't hide her choices anymore. Amara pressed her notebook closed again. She whispered to her father, "I didn't ask for this storm." Marcus placed a hand gently over hers. "No one ever does, but storms find those strong enough to stand in them." She nodded, her throat tight. She could feel tears behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. The plane rocked once more. But this time Amara didn't flinch. She sat steady, her gaze fixed ahead. She didn't yet know how big this storm would become, but she knew one thing for certain, whatever power Coleman thought he had. It was slipping, moment by moment, as truth reached beyond the clouds. And somewhere below, on glowing screens across the country, strangers who had never met her were whispering her name. At 37,000 feet, the cabin glowed with the faint blue of night flight. Most passengers had pulled down their window shades, but few could sleep. The tension circling row 2 had become the center of gravity for everyone on board. Amara sat rigid, hands clasped around her notebook. She had written no new words since the sentence from earlier. The world is watching now. The graphite had cut deep into the page, the truth etched like a scar. Her father, Marcus, sat still but alert, his gaze drifting between Coleman, Sandra, and the restless passengers whispering in small clusters. He had lived long enough to recognize when silence was no longer safe, when silence was becoming complicity. The young man with the phone leaned over again, his voice hushed but urgent. It's over 50,000 views now. Comments everywhere, hashtags forming, people tagging the airline, some even tagging journalists. Elizabeth Grant's lips curved into a grim smile. That's how mountains begin to move one pebble at a time, rolling down a hill. Coleman shifted in his seat. He scrolled his phone quickly, trying to appear unconcerned, but beads of sweat glistened at his temple. He muttered under his breath. Ridiculous. Internet nobodies. They'll forget in a day. But he didn't believe it. Not fully. From the galley, Sandra's voice carried in a tight whisper to another attendant. I don't know what to do. I followed protocol, but now, it's everywhere. Her colleague frowned. Protocol doesn't matter if corporate thinks you embarrassed them. You better figure out which side you're on. Sandra's face paled. She adjusted her uniform nervously and glanced toward Amara, who sat upright, watching her with calm defiance. The turbulence subsided into a smoother rhythm, but the atmosphere inside thickened. Every passenger knew they were part of something larger than just a delayed seat assignment. Suddenly, a soft chime pinged in the flight deck. The captain's voice murmured to Sandra over the intercom, audible to none but crew. She hurried forward, disappearing behind the curtain. Minutes passed before she emerged again, her face drawn tight. She cleared her throat, her voice trying for calm. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be experiencing some holding patterns due to weather near our rival city. Please remain seated. The announcement was a lie. Marcus caught it instantly. He knew the cadence of false explanations designed to cover corporate fear. Something had reached the cockpit, likely from ground control. The video, the hashtags, the growing firestorm outside. Elizabeth leaned closer to Amara. They're stalling. Ground control must have called. Amara's breath caught. She wasn't sure whether to feel relief or dread. Relief that someone was paying attention. Dread that the weight of all those eyes might collapse onto her too quickly. Coleman noticed the shift too. His head jerked up, eyes narrowing at Sandra. What did they say? Was it about me? Sandra stiffened. Sir, I can't discuss crew communications with passengers. But her evasive tone confirmed everything. Coleman's jaw clenched. Unbelievable. You people are letting a child and some randoms with cell phones dictate operations. Marcus finally leaned forward, his voice low but firm. Richard. Sometimes a single truth is louder than an entire storm of lies, and you're hearing it now, whether you like it or not. Coleman turned red, but before he could retort, a ping came from a passenger's phone in row 5. The woman gasped. showing her screen to her husband. CNN just picked it up, she whispered, not quietly enough. It's breaking news. Gas fluttered like wings through the cabin. CNN. Breaking news. The video wasn't just viral, it had become a headline. Amara's heart pounded. She tried to steady her breathing, but the enormity pressed in. This wasn't just her seat anymore. This was her face, her fight, carried on the front pages of the world. Elizabeth reached across, resting a warm hand over Amara's. Don't be afraid of the size of it. Child, let the truth be as big as it needs to be. The captain's voice broke through the intercom again. More formal this time. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received instructions to remain in contact with ground control. Please stay seated. We'll update you shortly. Whispers erupted louder now. Passengers began piecing it together. It wasn't weather. It wasn't turbulence. It was the storm below tweets, shares, and headlines colliding with corporate ears. Sandra's face drained of color. She hurried to Marcus, her tone suddenly deferential. Sir, I need to ask, is there someone you'd like me to contact, a representative for you? Marcus regarded her coolly. You had that chance when you first saw the boarding pass. Sandra swallowed, unable to meet his eyes. She stepped back, visibly shaken. Coleman erupted, his voice sharp. This is insane. I'm a platinum customer. They can't treat me like this. Elizabeth's voice rang out, firm and clear. They can, and they will, because for once, the world is watching. Every head turned toward her. The authority in her voice was unshakable. Coleman shrank slightly, his outrage losing its sharp edge. Amara finally spoke, her voice soft but carrying. I didn't ask for this. I just wanted my seat. But maybe this is bigger than me now. The words hushed the cabin, their honesty sinking deeper than any lecture could. For a long moment, even the engines seemed quieter. Marcus looked at his daughter, pride softening his features. He had seen boardrooms bend to profit, governments bend to pressure, but nothing bent the world faster than the sight of a child standing her ground with quiet dignity. The young man across the aisle refreshed his feed, his eyes wide. It's already over 200,000 views. Hashtags trending worldwide. People demanding answers from the airline. Reporters asking who she is. Amara closed her notebook slowly. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out. If they want to know who I am, tell them my name. Tell them I'm Amara Jenkins, and I belong here. The young man nodded fiercely. He began typing. Her name entered the stream of data now flooding the world below. Coleman exhaled sharply, sinking back in his stolen seat. For the first time, fear flickered across his face. Not fear of Amara, but fear of accountability, the kind that spreads faster than any denial. Sandra's hand trembled as she adjusted her blazer. She looked at Amara with something close to apology. But it was too late. The cameras were already watching, and silence had already chosen its side. The captain's voice returned, tighter now. Ladies and gentlemen, due to communications with ground control, we are preparing for possible diversion. Please remain calm and seated. Gas filled the cabin. Diversion. The word hit heavier than turbulence. The flight wasn't just delayed, it was being rerouted because of this storm. Amara sat back, her heart steadying even as her palms sweated. She realized something profound. One voice, one refusal, could ripple outward until even the engines of a jetliner bowed to it. The plane cut through night air, its cabin cloaked in muted light. Passengers shifted uneasily, not because of turbulence, but because of the tension simmering in row 2. Every eye seemed drawn there, as if waiting for a verdict. Amara sat upright, her small frame steady. She no longer clutched her notebook, her hands rested open on her knees, as if ready for whatever came next. Her name was already spreading across the digital world. She could almost feel it echoing, the weight of strangers whispering, typing, and defending her beyond the walls of this plane. Marcus watched her closely, pride etched deep in his calm expression. He knew storms of finance, storms of politics, storms of prejudice. But this storm was his daughter's, and she was standing in it with a poise far beyond her years. From the cockpit, a sharp chime rang out again. Sandra, pale and tense, hurried forward when the captain summoned her. Minutes later, she emerged, and this time her composure cracked. She leaned down toward Coleman, her voice tight. "Sir, ground control has been monitoring. They've instructed us to resolve this seating dispute immediately." Coleman's eyes widened. "What?" "That's absurd. I told you. I'm Platinum Sandra cut him off. Something she hadn't dared before. Sir, this is not optional. We've been ordered to correct the record before further escalation." The words rippled through the nearby rows, whispers surging like a tide. Passengers leaned in, waiting for what would follow. Coleman's face flushed. "You can't be serious. You're going to humiliate me because some brat wants attention." Marcus leaned forward, his voice calm but resonant. "No, Richard. You humiliated yourself the moment you chose entitlement over truth." Amara stayed silent, her eyes fixed on Coleman. She wanted to speak, to shout, but instead she let the moment hang. She had already said enough. The world had carried her words. Elizabeth Grant's voice sliced through the murmurs. "Give up the seat." The whole plane saw the ticket. The whole world has too. Coleman turned toward Sandra, his last lifeline. "You'll regret this. All of you. I have friends on the board. Do you understand?" But Sandra was trembling. She had chosen silence once, but now the ground beneath her had shifted. She knew corporate eyes were watching, judging her every move. "Sir, please stand," she said, voice quivering but firm. Gasps rose across the cabin. For the first time, the order was explicit. Coleman's fists clenched around the armrests. He didn't move. Amara's breath caught. She remembered his whispered call. "I'll make sure it sticks." What if he refused entirely? What if he caused chaos mid-air? The engines droned on, steady as a heartbeat. But inside, the cabin felt as fragile as glass. Sandra glanced toward Marcus, silently pleading for support. He shook his head. "Don't look at me. You had every chance to do right without an order. Now you'll carry it out." Coleman shot up suddenly, his movement sharp enough to make nearby passengers flinch. He towered over Sandra, pointing a finger in her face. "You think you can embarrass me like this? You think some girl's more important than me?" Elizabeth stood too, surprisingly swift for her age. Her voice rang with unshakable steel. "She's more important because she told the truth. That's all it takes to outshine you." A wave of murmurs surged into open agreement. Passengers spoke louder now. "She deserves her seat. Enough already." "Sit down or get off." Coleman looked around, suddenly aware that not a single ally remained. Even those who had been silent now glared openly. The weight of judgment pressed from every side. Sandra steadied herself, her voice firmer now. "Sir, please step aside. If you do not comply, we'll be forced to divert, and security will meet us upon landing." The word security landed like a stone. Coleman froze, his chest heaving. He knew what viral videos plus defiance meant. His career, his reputation, his platinum status, everything could collapse. Finally, with a grunt of frustration, he yanked his bag from under the seat and stormed down the aisle. Gasps and murmurs followed him as he shoved into a new row, slumping down like a sulking child stripped of his toy. Sandra exhaled shakily, turning toward Amara. For the first time, her eyes softened. "Miss Jenkins, the seat is yours." The cabin erupted not in applause, but in a collective sigh, relief mixing with admiration. Amara rose slowly, her legs trembling, but her chin lifted. She stepped into the aisle, clutching her notebook, and moved toward 2A. Her heart raced, but her steps were steady. Sliding into the leather seat, she fastened the belt and looked straight ahead. Elizabeth's eyes glistened as she whispered, "That's what dignity looks like." Marcus leaned close to his daughter. "You didn't just claim a seat. You claimed your voice. And voices like yours shake the sky." The plane soared forward through the night, but inside the cabin, something had shifted forever. Passengers exchanged glances, some quietly nodding, others wiping their eyes. They knew they had witnessed more than a quarrel. They had seen truth wrestle arrogance and win. Sandra returned to the galley, her hands trembling still. She whispered to her colleague, "Corporate told us they're already drafting a statement. The video's everywhere. They don't want us landing without resolution." Her colleague shook his head. "Too late. This is going to follow us long after we land." Amara sat back, clutching her notebook against her chest. The seat wasn't just leather and space anymore. It was a symbol of belonging, of defiance, of truth too powerful to ignore. And somewhere below, in glowing screens across the country, strangers were watching live updates, retweeting headlines, and whispering her name, Amara Jenkins. The air inside the cabin felt lighter after Richard Coleman had been forced to move, but it was not peace. It was that fragile silence that follows a storm, when people glance around, wondering what damage remains hidden. Amara sat in 2A now, the seat she had paid for and defended. Yet her chest still rose and fell quickly. The leather pressed against her shoulders like a throne she wasn't sure she wanted. She whispered almost to herself, "Why did it take all this for them to believe me?" Marcus heard her and placed a hand over hers. "Because the world doesn't always see what's right in front of them. But tonight, you made them see." Elizabeth Grant leaned over from across the aisle, her lined face soft with admiration. "Child, don't ever think you didn't earn this moment. You held yourself with grace while others scrambled in shame." The murmur of passengers carried through the cabin. Some whispered about Amara, some about Coleman, and many about the live stream still flashing across phones. A young man 2 rows back muttered, "It's already on CNN's ticker. Look, black girl CEO forced to defend. Seat at 30,000 feet. Sandra stood near the galley, trying to steady herself. Her radio had buzzed twice more. She knew corporate wasn't simply watching anymore, they were preparing. The voice from the ground had been clear. "Resolve this, or we will." She approached Marcus cautiously. "Sir, I need to inform you. Corporate has issued an internal statement. They want me to apologize to you and your daughter directly. They're drafting an external release as well." Marcus's expression was unreadable. So it takes the internet's fury to trigger an apology. Sandra's lips parted, but no words came. She lowered her eyes and nodded. Richard Coleman, now slouched 3 rows back, muttered curses under his breath. His phone glowed as he texted furiously, The man who once bragged about board connections now looked like a schoolboy caught cheating on an exam. Amara leaned closer to her father. "Daddy, do you think they'll really mean it? Or is it just to calm people down?" Marcus sighed. "That's the question. Every apology must answer, is it for change or for silence?" In the rear of the cabin, another passenger, a tech blogger named Zoe Washington, spoke into her phone. Her live stream had drawn nearly 80,000 viewers. "Folks, you just saw it, Amara Jenkins, 12-year-old billionaire founder of Dreamscape AI, finally in her rightful seat. The airline says a statement is coming, but people aren't waiting. Hashtag Amara Deserves Better is already trending at #2 nationwide." The buzz spread like fire. Screens lit up across the cabin, strangers following the digital storm even as they sat in the eye of it. Amara pressed her palms together, whispering. She wasn't praying exactly, but centering herself. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing in from thousands of unseen faces. Elizabeth reached out and touched her arm gently. "Let them talk. Let them rage. But don't let it take your peace. Tonight you showed something the world can't unsee." Sandra's colleague hurried up the aisle with wide eyes. "Sandra, corporate just patched through again. They said if Coleman causes further disruption, the captain is authorized to divert. Security will meet the plane upon landing either way." The word divert passed like a shadow. Passengers shifted, murmuring. The possibility of being forced to land elsewhere, of missing connections, suddenly made Coleman's tantrum everyone's problem. Coleman must have heard because he shot to his feet, his voice sharp. "You can't threaten me with diversion. This whole plane knows who I am." Elizabeth rose once more, her voice like steel. "Yes, we do. That's the problem." The cabin broke into scattered applause, surprising even Elizabeth herself. Coleman's face burned red, and he sank back into his seat, defeated. Up front, Amara closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of her mother, who had told her once, "The higher you rise, the louder the world tests you. But you don't need to answer every test, just the ones that define you." Her notebook rested in her lap again, pages fluttering lightly with the hum of the air. She scribbled a single line in small, steady letters. "Dignity is louder than arrogance." Marcus saw it, and a small smile crossed his lips. "That line will live longer than tonight." Sandra returned, voice lower this time. "Mr. Jenkins, Amara, the company's CEO will be issuing a personal apology when we land. They're also instructing us to ensure you receive any assistance you need: transportation, accommodations, security if requested." Marcus nodded, but did not thank her. The weight of gratitude didn't belong here, not after humiliation had forced the apology. The cabin settled into a tense quiet. Some passengers closed their eyes, but many stayed awake, unwilling to miss another moment. Phones continued to glow, hashtags multiplying like sparks. Zoe's voice carried from the back, still narrating to her audience. "Mark my words, this isn't just a flight delay story. This is going to shape policy. When the world sees a child billionaire denied dignity, they'll ask what hope anyone else has. And maybe, just maybe, that question will force real change." Amara leaned her head against the cool window. The stars outside shimmered against endless black sky. For the first time since boarding, she let herself breathe fully. The storm was not over, but she had survived its first wave. She whispered to herself, soft enough only her father could hear, "If they see me tonight, maybe they'll see others tomorrow." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "That's the kind of vision that makes leaders, Amara, not just CEOs, leaders of people's hearts. The engines droned on, steady, carrying them forward into a future that no one on that flight or watching from afar could predict. When the captain's voice finally cut through the intercom, the cabin straightened in unison. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent into JFK shortly. Please remain seated as we prepare for landing." The words felt like a verdict. For hours, the cabin had simmered under tension and whispers. Now, the finish line approached, but no one believed this story would end neatly on the tarmac. Amara sat quietly in 2A, her small frame pressed against the window as the lights of New York glowed in the distance like scattered diamonds. Her reflection in the glass startled her, a girl who looked older than she had when the flight began, eyes steady, mouth firm. Marcus leaned close, his voice a calm current. "Remember, Amara, what happens after landing matters more than what happened in the air. How you carry yourself now will define the story others tell." Amara nodded, clutching her notebook like an anchor. Richard Coleman, 3 rows back, scrolled through his phone furiously. His jaw tightened with every headline flashing across the screen. Child CEO targeted in seat dispute. Dreamscape prodigy faces discrimination midair. The words cut deeper because they were everywhere. He had called in favors, texted allies, but replies were curt, evasive. No one wanted their name tied to his tonight. Elizabeth Grant adjusted her cardigan, whispering to the woman beside her. "Mark my words, child. Cameras will be waiting. This little girl is about to walk into history, whether she wants it or not." Sandra hovered near the galley, pale but composed. Her radio buzzed again. She listened, then nodded grimly. The orders were clear. Federal officers will meet the flight at Gate 32. Cooperate fully. Do not interfere. As the wheels touched down, the cabin jolted. Passengers clutched armrests. But it wasn't turbulence that made them uneasy. It was the certainty that the world outside had grown restless while they were confined inside. The plane taxied slowly, every second heavy with anticipation. Marcus could feel Amara's pulse racing under her small hand. "Breathe, Amara," he whispered. "The storm only strengthens those who walk through it." When the seatbelt sign clicked off, passengers craned their necks. Through the small oval windows, blue and red lights flickered across the tarmac. Law enforcement vehicles idled near the gate. Cameras glinted beyond the glass walls of the terminal. Sandra's voice, shaky but official, rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until instructed. Federal officers will be boarding shortly." The words unleashed a wave of gasps. Some passengers clutched their phones tighter, ready to capture the next chapter. Others whispered prayers. The cabin doors opened, and 2 FBI agents stepped in, their dark suits crisp against the sterile light. One introduced himself briskly. "Special Agent Carter, we are here on federal directive. We'll need to speak with Mr. Jenkins, Miss Jenkins, and Mr. Richard Coleman." Coleman flinched at the sound of his name. His face paled, but he forced a sneer. "This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here." Agent Carter's gaze was steady, unimpressed. "Sir, we'll determine that. Please stay seated until called." Amara's stomach twisted. She had never seen FBI agents in person before. The weight of their presence reminded her that this was bigger than a seat, bigger than a flight. It was about truth and what people would do to bury it. Marcus rose calmly. "We'll cooperate fully, but I insist my daughter be treated with dignity in every word you use." Carter inclined his head. "Of course, sir." As officers began ushering passengers row by row, the terminal outside erupted. Reporters pressed against glass, microphones raised. their muffled shouts bleeding into the cabin. "Amara, what happened, Mr. Jenkins? Was this racial discrimination? Do you plan legal action?" Elizabeth caught Amara's eye and whispered fiercely, "Don't let their noise drown your truth." Finally, it was Amara's turn. She rose slowly, the cabin watching. Her steps down the aisle felt like a march, each footfall echoing louder than the last. Phones lifted, flashes popped. She walked past Coleman without a glance. Coleman, unable to restrain himself, spat words at her back. "You ruined me, you little fraud. You'll pay for this." The agent stiffened, turning toward him sharply. Marcus stopped mid-step, his body taut, but Amara didn't turn. She gripped her notebook tighter, her head held high. Outside, the jet bridge was chaos. Reporters lined the narrow passage, their voices a storm. The agents shielded Amara and Marcus, guiding them firmly. Yet microphones slipped through cracks, desperate for a soundbite. "Amara, did he target you because of your race? Do you feel safe flying again? Mr. Jenkins, do you intend to sue the airline?" Amara's voice was quiet, but clear when she finally spoke. "I just wanted my seat. That's all. Everyone deserves the seat they paid for. Nothing more, nothing less." Her words, so simple and steady, cut sharper than any headline. The reporters froze for a heartbeat, their noise briefly hushed. Behind her, Coleman emerged under escort, his face contorted with rage. Cameras surged toward him. "Mr. Coleman, did you harass a minor? Did you know she's the CEO of Dreamscape?" AI Coleman snapped. "This is a setup. She's just a child." But his words dissolved under the weight of his image. A furious man dragged behind a composed girl. The optics told the story better than words ever could. Inside the terminal, monitors already played live footage from passengers' phones. News anchors debated in real time. Social media scrolls filled with side-by-side photos. Amara calm, Coleman livid. Hashtags multiplied. A justice for Amara. As it grounded for truth. Seats for all. As agents led Amara and Marcus into a private room, she looked at her father. "Is it really over now?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "No. Amara, this is just the beginning. When the world sees truth this clearly, those who fear it will push harder to bury it." Agent Carter placed a folder on the table, his tone professional but edged with gravity. "Mr. Jenkins, Miss Jenkins, what happened on that flight intersects with something larger. Mr. Coleman is under investigation already for ties to corporate sabotage, financial fraud, and connections that reach beyond this airline." Amara blinked, stunned. Marcus leaned forward, his voice even. "So tonight was no accident." Carter met his gaze. "No, sir. And if what we suspect is true, your daughter may have stumbled into a storm far more dangerous than anyone realized." Amara clutched her notebook tighter, her mind racing. She had wanted nothing but to sit in her seat, but now she realized her stand had exposed more than arrogance. It had pulled the curtain back on corruption that thrived in shadows. And as the cameras outside roared, as the world debated her name, Amara whispered to herself once more, "Then I can't stop now." The private conference room at JFK was stark white walls, a long table, and the hum of fluorescent lights that made the air feel heavier. Outside, the world howled with microphones and flashing cameras. Inside, it was silence, punctuated only by the rustle of a folder. Special Agent Carter slid the folder across the table toward Marcus. "These are preliminary findings," he said. "I want you to understand why tonight escalated the way it did." Amara sat close to her father, her hands folded over her notebook. She looked at Carter with wide, steady eyes. Is this about Richard Coleman? Carter nodded. Yes. Coleman isn't just an entitled passenger. He's connected to TechCore. The name froze Marcus in place. His brows knit. TechCore. The same TechCore that's been trying to acquire Dreamscape for months. Yes, Carter said evenly. We've been tracking financial flows and boardroom maneuvers. Coleman's one of their contractors, an enforcer of sorts. Not in the physical sense, but in the corporate sense. He exerts pressure, manipulates situations, makes people look weaker than they are. And when that footage of you, Miss Jenkins, went live tonight, we realized exactly how deep this ran. Amara frowned. You mean, he tried to humiliate me because a TechCore Carter met her eyes. That's what we suspect. They wanted to chip away at your credibility. If the public sees you as just a spoiled child, not a visionary, it gives them leverage in their hostile bid. Amara looked down at her notebook, words swimming across the page she'd written earlier. Dignity is louder than arrogance. Her throat tightened. So it wasn't just racism. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. It was both. Amara, they used prejudice as a weapon because they thought it would stick. Elizabeth Grant, who had been invited into the room as a witness, leaned forward. Her old eyes glittered with fire, and they thought wrong. The world saw exactly what they did. Don't let them spin it any other way. Carter cleared his throat. Here's the problem. Now that Coleman's exposed, TechCore won't back down. If anything, they'll double their efforts. They don't want your company, they want your silence. And tonight, you made silence impossible. The room seemed to shrink around Amara. She was 12, yes, but her mind carried the weight of boardrooms and codes, algorithms and visions. Yet this was heavier than any algorithm. She whispered, "What if I can't carry it?" Marcus turned her gently so she faced him. His voice was low, steady. "Amara, you don't have to carry it alone. You have me. You have Dreamscape's team. You even have strangers now, millions who saw the truth and stood with you. The question isn't whether you can carry it. The question is whether you'll step into the light knowing it may never let you rest again." Silence stretched, thick with meaning. Elizabeth spoke again, her voice softer now. "Child, history doesn't ask permission before it arrives. It just arrives, and sometimes it arrives in the form of a seat stolen from a little girl. What you do with that moment, that's what people will remember." Amara's chest rose and fell. She thought of her mother's words, of her father's steady hand, of the passengers' voices chanting in the cabin. She deserves her seat. She thought of Coleman's sneer, his promise to ruin her. And she thought of the millions watching, tweeting, whispering her name. Her pencil scratched across a fresh page of her notebook. She wrote, "If they tried to bury me, it's because they knew I was a seed." She lifted her eyes to Carter. "What happens next?" Carter folded his hands. "That's up to you. The FBI can open a full-scale investigation into Coleman and TechCore. We already have enough to justify it. But your testimony and your willingness to go public would give it strength. It would transform this from a flight incident into a national reckoning." Marcus studied his daughter carefully. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the child wanting peace, the leader knowing peace required fire. "You don't have to answer tonight," he said gently. But Amara shook her head. "No. If I wait, they'll spin it. They'll twist me into something I'm not. I'd rather speak before they can." Carter's lips tightened into something close to a smile. "That's brave, Miss Jenkins, brave and dangerous. Once you step out, there's no going back." Elizabeth's voice cut the air again. "And yet, she's already out. The world already saw her." The question isn't whether she'll be in the spotlight. It's whether she'll control the story or let them write it for her. Amara leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling lights. The hum was steady, like the engines had been in the air. She remembered the moment she walked to 2A, each step feeling like a march. She remembered how her silence spoke louder than Coleman's rage. Finally, she lowered her gaze. I'll do it. I'll testify. I'll speak. If they want to scare me, I'll show them I'm not afraid. Marcus exhaled, half proud, half worried. Then we'll stand with you. Carter nodded firmly. In that case, we'll begin. Tomorrow, we'll arrange a secure press briefing. You'll have the chance to make your statement. And we'll move forward with indictments. Amara closed her notebook and placed it flat on the table, her hands resting atop it. Her fingers trembled, but her voice was clear. Then let's make sure they never steal another seat again. The agents exchanged glances, quietly impressed. Elizabeth reached out and squeezed Amara's hand. Child, you may be 12, but tonight you spoke like someone carrying generations. And for the first time since the flight began, Amara allowed herself a small, tired smile. But deep in her chest, she knew the storm was far from over. The next morning, New York woke restless. Outside the Federal Building in Lower Manhattan, camera crews staked claim to every inch of sidewalk. Reporters rehearsed their lines. Producers barked into headsets, and ordinary citizens crowded behind barricades just to glimpse the girl whose name now filled every screen. Inside, Amara stood before a mirror in a small prep room. She wore a simple navy dress and flats, her hair tied neatly back. No designer labels, no theatrics, just a 12-year-old trying to steady her breath. Marcus adjusted her collar gently. Remember, Amara, you don't need to perform. Just tell the truth, the way you did in that cabin. Amara looked up at him, eyes wide but firm. What if I freeze? What if they twist my words? Elizabeth Grant, sitting in a corner chair, leaned forward with that no-nonsense tone only elders could pull off. Child, if you speak from your heart, no twist in the world can erase it. Truth carries its own weight. Special Agent Carter entered, crisp in his dark suit. It's time. The room's full, and feeds are live. Amara clutched her notebook against her chest. She whispered under her breath, repeating the line she had written the night before. If they tried to bury me, it's because they knew I was a seed. The double doors opened. A wave of camera flashes hit her like a sudden storm. She squinted, but kept walking. Marcus at her side, Elizabeth trailing just behind. At the podium, microphones bristled like a metal forest. Reporters shouted questions, but Carter raised a hand. You'll have your turn. Miss Jenkins will read her statement first. Amara placed her notebook on the podium, fingers trembling slightly as she flipped to a fresh page. She looked out hundreds of eyes, some skeptical, some hungry, many supportive. Then she began. My name is Amara Jenkins. I am 12 years old. I am the founder and CEO of Dreamscape AI. Last night, on Flight 11382, my seat was taken from me, not because of confusion, but because someone believed I didn't belong where I was. I was told, without proof, that I must move. I was doubted because of who I am, not what my ticket said. Her voice wavered for just a moment, then steadied. But I want you to understand this isn't just about me. I had the resources, the platform, the parents, the community to defend myself. Many don't. Many are silenced before anyone believes them. And if a girl who built a company can be treated this way, imagine the voices we never hear. The room hushed. Even the shuffling of photographers slowed. Amara continued, I didn't fight for a seat just for me. I fought because dignity should not depend on your age, your race, or your gender. Dignity is a right, and I will continue to speak until that right is respected everywhere, even 30,000 feet in the air." When she stepped back, the silence was deafening. Then, like a sudden wave, applause broke out. Reporters clapped. Citizens outside pressed against glass, cheering. The sound rattled the walls. Marcus wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders, pride softening his usual steel composure. Elizabeth wiped her eyes openly, unashamed. "You spoke like you'd lived 100 years, child." But as the questions began, the storm turned again. "Miss Jenkins, are you accusing the airline of systemic racism? Mr. Jenkins, will you pursue legal action? Miss Jenkins, some sources claim your company inflated its valuation. Care to comment?" That last question hit like a sucker punch. Amara blinked, confused. She hadn't expected it. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Another reporter pounced. "There are rumors TechCore has documents suggesting Dreamscape exaggerated its contracts. Do you deny this?" Carter stepped forward quickly. "We'll take no further questions on that matter today." But the damage had been done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Back in the prep room, Amara sank into a chair, her small hands trembling. What was that? Why would they say that Marcus crouched in front of her? Because TechCore isn't stupid. They know public sympathy is with you. So they're trying a new tactic, make people question your integrity. If they can't silence your voice, they'll stain it. Elizabeth bristled. Filthy cowards. Attacking a child because they can't beat her ideas. Carter exhaled heavily. This is their counter-strike. We anticipated it, but not this fast. They've already pushed stories to friendly outlets. Probably leaked fabricated documents. The good news. Their desperation shows. The bad news. Public opinion is fickle. Some will believe the lie before the truth catches up. Amara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. So what do I do? Keep fighting or stay quiet, so they don't twist more things? Marcus's voice was low, steady. Amara, silence won't protect you. It never has. You speak, and you keep speaking. Lies fade, but truth has endurance. Amara opened her notebook and wrote slowly, each letter deliberate. Let them throw mud. Seeds grow best in dirt. She looked up, her eyes fierce now. Then let's fight. They want to bury me. I'll grow taller. Elizabeth let out a short laugh, part pride, part awe. Lord, this child is fire. Carter's phone buzzed. He glanced at it grimly. We just got word TechCore's CEO, Diane Chen, is holding her own press briefing this afternoon. Expect her to go on the offensive. She'll deny connections to Coleman and try to paint Dreamscape as unstable. Marcus straightened, his jaw tight. Then we prepare, and we don't let them write the story for us. Amara closed her notebook, pressing it against her chest once more. For the first time since boarding that plane, she didn't feel like just a girl defending her seat. She felt like a girl standing on the edge of something bigger, a battle not just for herself, but for every voice forced to the back. And though fear coiled in her stomach, her resolve burned brighter. By late afternoon, the story had twisted again. Television screens blared across airports, coffee shops, and living rooms with the same headline in different words. Bauer, TechCore CEO speaks out. Amid Jenkins' controversy, in a glassy tower overlooking Manhattan. Diane Chen stood before a row of cameras, elegant, composed. Her voice dripped with calm authority. We at TechCore value diversity and innovation, she said smoothly. But questions must be asked about the stability of certain emerging companies. We regret the unfortunate incident involving Miss Jenkins on Flight 182. Yet, documents circulating raise serious concerns about Dreamscape AI's valuation and governance. We must separate sympathy from scrutiny. The clip played on repeat. Her words chopped into sound bites concerns about Dreamscape AI. Separate sympathy from scrutiny. Amara sat in the Jenkins penthouse that evening, curled on the sofa, her notebook on her lap. The city lights glittered outside like shards of glass, but they brought her no comfort. On the television across the room, Diane's face replayed again and again, each time carving doubt deeper into the air. Elizabeth sat beside her, knitting slowly, the soft click of needles the only steady sound. "Child, you hear that? That's how wolves dress up as shepherds." Amara's throat tightened. "People believe her, don't they?" Marcus muted the TV and turned to his daughter. "Some will. That's the game she's playing. Cast a shadow long enough, and even the sunniest mind begins to wonder what it's hiding." Amara gripped her notebook, opening to the line she'd written earlier. "Seeds grow best in dirt." She wanted to believe it, but the dirt felt heavier than ever. Her voice cracked. "Dad, what if I'm not strong enough? What if Dreamscape falls because of me?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "Amara, listen. Companies rise and fall all the time. But what matters is who you are when the storm comes. TechCore's betting you'll crumble under the weight. Prove them wrong, not with anger, but with endurance." Elizabeth set down her knitting and took Amara's hand. "Child, you're 12 years old and already carrying burdens most grown men couldn't lift. Don't mistake the fear in your chest for weakness. It's proof you care, and caring is the root of strength." Amara looked between them, torn. "But if I fight back too hard, won't they say I'm just a child throwing a tantrum? And if I stay quiet, won't they say I'm guilty?" The question hung heavy, unanswered. Special Agent Carter entered, his tone brisk. "We've confirmed it. TechCore's smear campaign is coordinated. Paid bloggers, planted analysts, fake documents seeded in financial circles. They're trying to choke Dreamscape's credibility before the investigation closes in on them." Marcus frowned. "So they're escalating. That means we need to answer strategically." Carter nodded. "The FBI will handle the legal side, but public opinion is your battlefield. If Amara speaks again, it must be precise, controlled, impossible to twist." Amara's chest tightened. The thought of another podium, another sea of cameras, made her stomach twist. She wanted to hide, to close her notebook and curl into her father's arms. Yet, she remembered Coleman's sneer, Diane's polished smirk, the disbelief in strangers' eyes when she first defended her seat. Her pencil trembled as she wrote, "If silence is safety, then safety is a cage." She whispered it aloud, and Marcus's eyes softened. "You've already found your answer. Amara," Elizabeth squeezed her shoulder, "don't let wolves write your story. Child, you write it yourself." Marcus rose, pacing. "Here's what we'll do. Tomorrow, we counter with facts. Financial transparency, independent audits, proof of contracts. Let them sling mud, we'll show stone." Amara shook her head. "Surprising them. Facts aren't enough. People don't listen to spreadsheets. They listen to stories." Diane knows that's why she used words like sympathy versus scrutiny. "She's turning my story into weakness. I have to turn it back into strength." Her words hung in the air, sharper than her age should allow. Marcus stopped pacing, pride flickering across his face. "Then what do you propose?" Amara looked at her notebook, her handwriting slanted but strong. I'll speak again, not just as a CEO, but as a girl who was told she didn't belong. I'll remind them what this started with a seat stolen and a truth defended. If they see me as human first, maybe they'll see Dreamscape as more than numbers, too. Carter crossed his arms. It's risky. TechCore will double down, but it may be the only way to cut through the noise. Elizabeth smiled faintly. You hear that? That's not just strategy. That's vision. Silence settled again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was the silence of resolve, of a decision crystallizing in the air. Amara closed her notebook, hugging it to her chest. Fear still coiled in her stomach, but beneath it burned something stronger, a refusal to be erased. That night, long after Marcus and Elizabeth had gone to rest, Amara sat by the window, watching headlights crawl like fireflies below. She whispered to the glass, as if speaking to the millions she couldn't see. You can smear me, you can doubt me, but you can't silence me. And though the city outside roared on, for the first time that day, she felt a quiet power rising in her chest. The next morning, the world awoke to a divided conversation. On one side, pundits echoed Diane Chen's polished warnings about Dreamscape's stability. On the other, voices on social media demanded accountability, flooding timelines with the Justice for Amara, Dreamscape Strong, and even drawings from children who said they wanted to be like her. Inside a modest auditorium rented at the last minute in downtown Detroit, the Jenkins team prepared for their counterstrike. No flashing lights, no elaborate stage, just a simple podium with a single microphone, rows of folding chairs, and cameras from every major outlet. Marcus stood near the back, arms crossed, scanning the restless crowd. Elizabeth sat in the front row, her knitting bag resting on her lap like an anchor. Special Agent Carter lingered against the wall, earpiece in place, his eyes sharp for any sign of interference. But it was Amara, standing alone behind the curtain, who carried the true weight of the morning. She clutched her worn notebook, its pages filled with scribbles and underlined phrases. Her heart thudded in her chest, a rhythm both terrifying and steady. Zoe Washington, her COO, leaned in and whispered, "You don't have to do this. Numbers and facts could carry us through." Amara shook her head. Numbers can't heal. Stories can. The curtain parted, and a hush swept across the room. The sight of her so young, yet so composed, silenced even the most skeptical journalists. Cameras clicked, red lights blinked alive, and the broadcast went live to millions. She set her notebook on the podium and lifted her chin. For a moment, she simply breathed, letting the silence settle, letting the weight of all eyes sink in. Then she began. Yesterday, I was told to give up my seat, not because I didn't pay for it, not because I didn't belong on the plane, but because someone thought I couldn't possibly deserve it. Her voice wavered, then grew stronger. That moment wasn't just about me. It was about every child told they're too young to dream. Every woman told her ideas aren't worth hearing. Every person of color told they don't belong in the room they've already earned their way into. The room stilled. The journalists, trained to interrupt, simply listened. They said my company, Dreamscape, might not be stable. But what is stability? Is it silence in the face of lies? Is it shrinking yourself so others feel comfortable? Or is it standing when you're shaking, speaking when your voice trembles, and refusing to let others write your story? She paused, her small hand resting on the notebook. I am 12 years old. I run a company built on hope and hard work. I've made mistakes, and I'll make more. But Dreamscape is not a mirage. It is a vision, a vision that belongs to every young person who dares to imagine a better tomorrow. Her eyes swept the crowd. Steady now. TechCore wants you to believe I'm a child, pretending at power. But maybe they fear the truth that the future doesn't wait for permission. Elizabeth dabbed her eyes quietly. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his pride was unmistakable. Amara closed her notebook. I'm not here to ask for sympathy. I'm here to remind you of something simple. We all have a seat, paid for, earned, deserved, and no one has the right to take it away. The final words echoed, simple yet heavy, as though they carried the weight of centuries. The room erupted not with polite applause, but with thunder. Reporters leapt to their feet. Hashtags exploded across screens. Nor our seat. Amara speaks. Why future belongs. Elizabeth leaned toward Marcus and whispered, She didn't just answer Diane. She rewrote the whole question. Marcus exhaled slowly, relief softening his face. She's her mother's daughter. Backstage, Amara returned, trembling but radiant. Zoe hugged her tightly. You did it. You turned their smear into your spotlight. Carter's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. Careful. TechCore isn't finished. Diane's not the type to retreat quietly. Marcus frowned. What's she planning? Carter tucked the phone away. Rumor says they've lined up a witness, someone willing to testify that Dreamscape manipulated numbers, maybe even falsified contracts. It's thin, but if they drop it at the wrong moment, the narrative could flip again. Amara sank into a chair, fatigue settling over her small frame. So no matter what I say, they'll keep attacking. Elizabeth touched her shoulder. Child, wolves howl loudest when they're cornered. That's all this is. Proof they're afraid. Marcus crouched in front of his daughter. You've already won something they can't take trust. The people saw you today, not as a number or rumor, but as yourself. Whatever TechCore throws next, we'll face it together. Amara nodded faintly, clutching her notebook again. Inside, she scribbled a single line. Truth is louder than fear, but only if spoken out loud. By evening, her speech had traveled across the globe. Networks replayed it. Commentators dissected it. Parents showed their children. And children whispered to themselves that maybe their dreams weren't so impossible after all. And somewhere, in a high-rise office, Diane Chen watched the same broadcast. Her smile was thin, her eyes calculating. She's better than I expected, Diane murmured, turning to her advisors. But even the brightest flame burns faster when starved of oxygen. Prepare the witness. The battle was far from over. The storm broke 2 days later. At noon, Diane Chen strode into a press conference in San Francisco, flanked by lawyers and a man in a dark suit. Cameras clicked, anchors whispered. Anticipation thickened. Diane's voice rang smooth and sharp. Today, we present testimony from a former Dreamscape contractor. This witness will show the pattern of manipulated contracts and inflated valuations that raise serious doubts about Miss Jenkins' leadership. The man stepped forward, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously at the crowd. I worked on Dreamscape's infrastructure. I was pressured to alter invoices, to hide costs. It was unethical. Gas rippled. Headlines bloomed instantly. Whistleblower claims fraud at Dreamscape. Across Detroit, Amara, Marcus, Elizabeth, Zoe, and Agent Carter watched the live feed in silence. For a moment, even Elizabeth's knitting stilled. Amara's lips parted, her voice trembling. That's not true. I never told anyone to do that. Carter's jaw tightened. We've been expecting this. But look closer. His name is Robert Klein. He was terminated from TechCore 3 years ago for falsifying invoices. He's not a whistleblower. He's a pawn. Marcus exhaled slowly, steadying himself. Then we expose it. Not tomorrow, not later. Now. Elizabeth leaned forward, her voice firm. Child, this is the final snare they laid. But remember, wolves forget that lambs grow teeth when the flock is threatened. Within hours, the counterstrike came. Amara stood once more before cameras, this time flanked by Elizabeth and Richard Blackwell, the same man who had stolen her seat days ago. His expression was solemn, his voice humble. I wronged Miss Jenkins on that flight, Richard said, his hands gripping the podium. I thought my money, my status, gave me more right than her. I was wrong. I was blind. And I was part of TechCore's scheme. They offered me a contract millions if I played my part. I came clean because what I saw in her isn't fraud. It's truth. And truth deserves protection. The room buzzed. Cameras swung wildly. Diane's carefully constructed witness cracked under the weight of betrayal. Elizabeth stepped forward, her frail hands holding a folder. For years, TechCore built its empire on lies. I was part of it once, but I left when I saw how they targeted minority founders, pushing them out or buying them cheap. These documents, board memos, internal emails prove the pattern. This isn't about one girl. It's about an entire system built to silence voices like hers. Reporters surged forward. Questions flew. Headlines flipped. Former exec and investor expose TechCore conspiracy. Amara took the podium last. Her small frame seemed to grow taller in the silence. She opened her notebook, glancing at the words she'd written the night before. Truth is louder than fear, but only if spoken out loud. She lifted her gaze. They wanted to bury me under doubt. They wanted you to believe a 12-year-old girl couldn't possibly build something real. But Dreamscape is not built on lies. It is built on vision, on work, and on the belief that imagination belongs to everyone. Today, you've seen the truth. Not because I shouted louder, but because people chose courage over silence. Her voice softened, steady as stone. This began with a seat stolen on a plane, but it ends here, with a truth no one can steal. We all deserve our seat earned, paid for, rightful, and we all deserve a world where no one can take it away. Applause thundered, raw and uncontainable. Reporters stood, not just to capture a story, but to honor a moment. The fallout was swift. The FBI raided TechCore's headquarters, seizing files and freezing accounts. Diane Chen resigned within a week, her reputation in shambles. Robert Klein recanted under investigation. Elizabeth testified before Congress, her words carrying the weight of both regret and redemption. Richard Blackwell, once a symbol of arrogance, became an advocate for reform, funding scholarships for young entrepreneurs of color. And Dreamscape soared. Investors once hesitant now lined up, not just for profits but for purpose. Contracts expanded, partnerships multiplied, and Amara's vision reached further than she had ever dreamed. Yet on the quiet after the storm, what lingered most wasn't victory, but healing. In the Jenkins penthouse, as evening lights bathed the city in gold, Amara sat with her father and Elizabeth. The weight had lifted, but its imprint remained. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. You did more than defend a company. You gave people hope. Elizabeth smiled softly, her knitting needles clicking again. Child, hope is the one currency no one can counterfeit. Amara opened her notebook, writing slowly, deliberately. Justice isn't revenge. Justice is remembering we are more than what they tried to take. She closed it and looked out at the city, her voice a whisper, but carrying all the strength she had earned. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. And somewhere in the hearts of millions watching, those words didn't just close a story. They opened a future. At its heart, Amara's story is not about airplanes or corporations. It's about dignity. She reminds us that the battles worth fighting often begin in the smallest of places: a seat, a voice, a moment where silence feels safer than speaking. Yet choosing to speak, even when your voice shakes, is the act that changes everything. For older audiences who have lived through years of challenges, this lesson resonates deeply. How many times have we seen people dismissed for their age, their color, or simply for being different? Amara's journey shows us that courage does not depend on size or years lived. It depends on the willingness to stand when others expect you to shrink. Her story also speaks to resilience. No smear campaign, no false witness, no storm of doubt could erase her truth. That is a lesson for us all. The world may question your worth, but it cannot take what you carry within. So in our own lives, when faced with injustice, great or small, we can remember Amara's choice: to stay seated, to claim what is rightfully ours, to believe that justice, even delayed, can still bring healing. Thank you for sharing your time and heart with this story. If it moved you, if it made you think, or if it reminded you of your own strength, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue bringing powerful stories of dignity, justice, and hope to life.